As humans, we're naturally driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. When I was looking to hire someone, it was so slow and overwhelming. I wish I had used Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woo-hooer, a hand clapper, a high-fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Calling All Creatures. Tonight I have a very interesting podcast. We're going to talk about Wolverines tonight. I thought it would be really cool to talk about these animals. I think they're kind of fascinating, and I'm wanting to learn more, and I'm hoping you guys did too. So tonight I have Rebecca Waters on with me. She's actually the previous executive director of the Wolverine Foundation, and correcting what my flyers and stuff said, but she's actually the director of the Mongolian Wolverine Project, which is, her own project. So we're going to talk with her about Wolverines and get some really interesting facts and stuff. So, Rebecca, thank you for being on the podcast tonight.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm glad to have you on so we can learn more about these animals. I think it's going to be interesting to hear more about them, and one of the nicknames I found and some of the other things which I thought was very interesting. But first, let's start out and maybe have you just tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, how did you get started in like wildlife conservation and I guess kind of, even working with Wolverines in specific?
Yeah, feel free to cut me off if I start to go on too long about this, because I could talk about wildlife in any aspect of Wolverines forever and ever. I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to do that and to reach out to more people about this amazing species. But for my personal story about how I got into wildlife conservation, I've always loved animals from the time I was a small kid, but I grew up in a household where I don't think I realized that being a wildlife biologist was even an option. My parents were both teachers, they're historians, and so there was a lot of emphasis on this kind of, academic approach to career, and which is also great. I mean, I love that as well. But then when I was finished with my undergraduate degree, which was in anthropology, I started to get very interested in the kind of human-environment relationship side of anthropology, and then after I graduated, I joined the Peace Corps and I went to Mongolia, and they assigned me as an environmental volunteer, even though I didn't really have that much environmental background. And when I got to Mongolia, what they wanted me to do was, it was half and half environmental education in the school system there, and the other part of it was working with the national parks. And through that experience, I would spend my summers doing snow leopard surveys, and my winters and springs and falls doing bird surveys with the national park. And I loved it. It was so incredible to me that you could actually do that as a job and be out walking around in the mountains every single day. And so when I came back to the United States after having worked in Mongolia and then subsequently Cambodia on wildlife conservation for a couple of years, I did my master's degree in wildlife conservation at the School of Forestry. It's now the School of Environmental Studies at Yale.
Wow, that would have been cool to, like you said, I mean, to go to Mongolia and do that kind of stuff. That would be really cool.
Yeah, it was so interesting because it was right after, Mongolia had only been democratic for about 10 years, and they were really reorganizing the way their conservation programs were run at the national level. And but at the same time, there's a really long history of commitment to wildlife and to landscape conservation there that goes back, thousands of years. And so for me, I felt like I was kind of assigned to bring these, certain sort of advanced scientific perspectives to Mongolia as part of my Peace Corps job. But what ended up happening was I realized that there was a much deeper set of values and a different kind of approach that already existed there. And I feel like I was the one who ended up learning so much more and having this just really different perspective on how to approach wildlife and conservation. So yeah, deeply grateful to have had that experience in so many ways.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then the Wolverine part that you asked about specifically, so I was really interested in doing something with high elevation wildlife when I came back from Mongolia, because that, of course, is what I had been doing there. And I really kind of wanted to do snow leopard stuff, but at the time it felt very challenging to get into that. And when I was doing my master's degree, I was working with an organization in Wyoming that my advisor had founded, and the executive director of that organization also happened to be the field coordinator for the Absaroka Beartooth Wolverine project. And I ended up going out on a kind of series of volunteer things and getting involved with Wolverine conservation through that connection. And then I found out that there was this unstudied population of Wolverines in Mongolia, and there was also a population of Wolverines in the United States, in the Rockies. And so it seemed like the perfect way to bridge both these places that I really love, the Western United States and Mongolia. So that was how the Wolverines came into the picture.
Snow leopards would have been cool, though.
I have been very fortunate to have come back into some a little bit of snow leopard work, and I dearly love that species. But I do like the capacity to make contributions to conservation in North America as well as in Mongolia, and so I will always love snow leopards. And also, I'm glad that I got sidetracked into Wolverines, because it did allow me to build some connections to the conservation world in the U.S. as well, and Canada.
Right. Yeah, so yeah, totally cool. Either one, but the snow leopards would be fascinating, just because, the cat aspect. I think they're really cool animals too, so.
They are spectacularly cool animals, for sure.
Yep. Wolverines are cool in their own rights, though, so.
Absolutely, yes.
So, if you wouldn't mind, can you give us a little bit of a history about the Wolverine Foundation?
Yeah, so the Wolverine Foundation was formed in 1996, and it was, this was well before I was on the scene, but there were very, very few studies of Wolverines at that time, and the researchers, I think it might have been every Wolverine researcher in the world, which was not that many people at that point, but it might have just been the North American researchers and the Scandinavian researchers got together, and they wanted to find a way to promote Wolverine research and to fund it. And so they founded the Wolverine Foundation to serve as an educational and also a research organization for Wolverine research worldwide. And the objective is really for the promotion of science-based management, and that includes funding, small-scale funding for Wolverine research programs and projects, and also doing public outreach, like the outreach that I'm doing right now, just talking to people about Wolverines and sharing enthusiasm and accurate information so that people do not continue to think that Wolverine is only an X-Men character.
Right. Exactly, because that's what most people think nowadays, especially younger people. Oh, Wolverine. Oh, okay, yeah, I know him.
Yep. absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the first reaction I always get. Oh yeah, X-Men, I know that character.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
He's got these...
talking about the Weasel.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's got these steel blades that come out. No.
Yeah. I mean, a fun anecdote that I always like to share is that apparently Hugh Jackman himself didn't even know that Wolverines were a real animal when he started playing that role. It took him a little bit of time to discover that he was actually not playing a wolf; he was playing a different animal. So,
oh my gosh, that's funny. That's great.
Yeah, which is why we need organizations that are willing to do some education and outreach and just talk about how cool the animal itself is, even without the X-Men connection.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a background on your Mongolian Wolverine project? What's that project about? Yeah,
that project is it's a project that is affiliated with with a specific set of Mongolian national parks in northern Mongolia, which is in the area of the best Wolverine habitat in the country. And it's really just trying to figure out what is going on with the Wolverine population in Mongolia, since it's never been formally studied through Western scientific means before. But it's also a collaborative project with the national parks there, and has expanded to look at a number of high elevation, climate sensitive wildlife species in the mountains. So really, at the inception, all I did was go around to different areas of Wolverine habitat in Mongolia and talk to people about what they knew about Wolverines, because people there have a much higher degree of knowledge about the local wildlife than people in the United States do. So you can go into the countryside in Mongolia and just chat with people about wildlife, and you will get just really detailed information that's accurate. And so that I spent several years doing that, and then started to do some genetic sampling from pelts that were already in the wildlife trade. And then we did 2 long-range ski expeditions around northern Mongolia. So those were both 30-day ski expeditions through the mountains, doing backtracking live Wolverines and collecting genetic samples from them to try to build a database to see if we could do this sort of non-invasive genetic-based monitoring of the species. Because here, at the time that I started this project, the tools that people were using were these collar studies, which are really expensive and very time consuming. And also you have to have people who know how to drug animals and handle them to put the collars on. And all of that, for logistical reasons, was going to be very, very difficult to try to accomplish in Mongolia. And so I was trying to find a non-invasive way to do long-range monitoring of the species. And I had just gotten to a point where the funding and partnerships were working really well, and the pandemic hit. And Mongolia closed its borders for 2 years, and so it got a bit derailed, but hoping to be back in the field again soon.
Wow. That's awesome, though. I mean, that you're working with them and doing this kind of work, yeah.
Well, thanks. I love it, but I mean, as much as I love being out there, I really do love the collaborative aspect of it. And I'm pretty fluent in Mongolian, and just the opportunity again to continue to share collaboration with great partners there is really key to why I think it's such a great project. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. It sounds like it'd be a really interesting and cool project, and then, getting to work in Mongolia and do all that kind of stuff again, that would be pretty cool. Haven't really been outside the United States too much, just Canada and Mexico.
I've never been to Mexico, so that sounds pretty adventurous from where I sit.
Yeah. It can be interesting with some of the stuff that happens down there, but... So,
I wouldn't even know where.
Yeah, a couple of times down like Puerto Penasco and stuff like that, but that was a long time ago. I haven't been down there recently. So So why don't you go ahead, if you wouldn't mind, and maybe just give us some basic information about wolverines in general, like, kind of like their habitats, diets, how big they can get. And you mentioned a minute ago a weasel, so they're a member of the weasel family, correct?
They are, and you mentioned they have a bunch of very interesting nicknames, and some of their nicknames evoke bears, and some of them evoke cats. And people are habitually confused about what family wolverines belong to, but they are the largest terrestrial member of the weasel family, or the mustelid family, to use the scientific term. And they are, when I say the largest terrestrial member, I'm saying that because sea otters, which are also mustelids, are larger. But if you're on land, the biggest one you're going to run into is a wolverine. As far as habitat goes, they're found in cold climates, so they're really tied to, in this part of the country, I'm in Montana, so in this part of the United States, they're tied to high elevation climates or habitats, so you find them pretty much only in mountain ranges. They'll disperse across low-lying landscapes, but they won't be able to survive there as a population over the long term. As you go further north, you find them throughout the boreal forest, and by the time you get up into kind of the tundra habitat, every place is wolverine habitat because it's cold enough to support them year-round. We typically find them in places that have a maximum August temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or around 22 degrees Celsius, and they tend to be found in places where you have consistent spring snowpack, or consistent snowpack that is on the ground until May. And if you don't have both those things, you don't have consistent wolverine populations. So you might have one or two that show up or that disperse through, but they can't make a living there for some particular reason. And that relationship is really strict until you get to a certain northern latitude, and that's the point at which everything becomes wolverine habitat, and then that really close relationship breaks down. But south of the border, so any place in the lower 48 of the United States, you're only going to find them in places that have late spring snowpack and maximum August temperatures under 70 degrees Fahrenheit. They are mostly scavengers, so we find them eating a lot of carrion. So we would say elk carcasses, moose carcasses, but especially mountain goat. They really seem to be found in places that have good mountain goat populations, like Glacier National Park in the United States, and they also eat mountain sheep, and they are capable of hunting. So a lot of people who do know that wolverines are animals and not X-Men know that wolverines have this reputation for being very ferocious. We do see instances of them taking down full-grown adult ungulates, such as reindeer and even moose, but that tends to happen in situations where the animal is stranded in the snow or is otherwise incapacitated in the deep snow. And we think that this is one of the reasons that wolverines are found so consistently in these places with snowpack and cold conditions. It's because they have these very big flat paws that serve as snowshoes, and they can kind of float on top of the snow as they're running. And these ungulates, of course, have long, skinny legs with hooves, and they punch through the snowpack, and it makes them much slower, and it's harder for them to get away. So being in those snowy climates really gives the wolverine an advantage when it does hunt. And when they're not hunting and they're just eating carrion that's on the landscape, of course, they have a natural refrigeration system in those cold environments, and so a carcass will last a wolverine for many, many months if the conditions stay cold. They have very large territories, so you can't fit that many of them on the landscape. That's an important point. And they are they're smaller than people think they are. So I get a lot of reports where people are like, "Oh, I saw this 150-pound wolverine in my backyard in Florida or something like that." And it's like, no, I think Florida's a bad example, but in a place that doesn't have wolverine populations, I tend to know that then that person's probably seen a bear if they're saying that it's that large. So a large wolverine in the northernmost part of the range, and of course animals are almost always bigger in the northern parts of their range, would be probably 40 pounds. Wolverines here in our study area in the Rockies have ranged from a full-grown adult female who was about 18 pounds to, a really large male would be about 30 pounds. And they live for about 15 years in the wild maximum. I think that's the longest recorded. Actually, that might have been in captivity, but that's where we sort of see the lifespan max out. Mm-hmm. And they reproduce. They have a pretty interesting reproductive strategy. So they mate during the summer, but the female doesn't actually become pregnant until probably about this time of year. And whether or not those fertilized eggs implant depend on her body condition. So if she isn't equipped, if she doesn't have enough body fat and her living conditions aren't good enough for her to successfully bear and nurse her kids, she just won't become pregnant. If she is in a territory that supports her well, and she's fat and healthy, she will become pregnant, and she will have between 1 and 4 kits. At some point in February, we like to say February 14th. If you want to celebrate it as Valentine's Day, that's fine. But if you would rather celebrate it as Wolverine birthday, we would love to see that become a thing. So yeah, February 14th is Wolverine birthday. It's the symbolic birthday of all of the Wolverine kits around the world. And then they stay in a snow den with their mother. So this is the only time Wolverines den. The females will dig a snow den, and they will have their kits in that snow den. And then they stay in there with their mom for about 3 months. And there are sort of conflicting reports, but we are pretty sure we have some good instances of the dad Wolverine coming and probably sharing food, or at least checking in on the kits. And then after they leave the den, so the snow melts and they're out on the landscape, they stick around in their parents' territories for up to 18 months. Sometimes they follow their mom, sometimes they follow their dad. So it's like a little sophisticated shared responsibility child-rearing situation. And then when they, at the most, they'll be 18 months old. Sometimes they leave earlier. Their parents will kick them out because their territories are sex exclusive. So no adult female Wolverine can be in another territory or in a territory with another adult female, and the same for the adult males. They'll kick each other out, or they'll kick their kits out once they get to that age. So, and then the kit has to disperse across the landscape and try to find another free territory that doesn't have a Wolverine in it already. Wow. So, yeah, sorry, this is a whole wide range of discussion of Wolverine biology and ecology, but that's the...
Oh, no, that's awesome. That's interesting to know that, though. I was wondering about their territories and stuff like that, because just for the fact that I was reading different things when I was researching more about Wolverines, that you don't really see a lot of them, and you don't really ever see them together. You'll see a solitary one. So that explains why. I mean, if they have their territories like that, so, male can't be with a male and female with female, that would explain a lot about that. So
yeah, you do sometimes see them together, but if you ever do see multiple Wolverines together, it's probably a parent and kits, or it is 2 kids who are related to each other. So yeah, you very rarely see them together.
Yeah,
that is true.
Interesting. So you had mentioned, so we already know that, we can find Wolverines in Mongolia, and we can find Wolverines here in the States. Are there other countries where the Wolverines exist or live?
Yeah, so there are circumboreal species, which means that they occur in the northern hemisphere and sort of around the boreal region and the Arctic region. So you find them in Canada, you find them in Russia, you find them in Scandinavia. There is a very small population in Kazakhstan. There's a small population in China. And, of course, Mongolia is the southernmost extent of the Wolverines' range in the Eastern Hemisphere, and the U.S. Rockies are the southernmost extent of their range in the Western Hemisphere.
All righty. So, Wolverines for their size, they're actually pretty powerful. How powerful are they?
I mean, it depends. It depends on what you mean by powerful. What kind of measure of power are you thinking about?
Well, I had kind of read they've been known to take down. I mean, like you were talking about the reindeer or the deer and stuff like that. So some animals that are a bit bigger than them, and they've been known to. I don't know how many times they've won, but I mean, they've even have fought off like what the black bears or something like that as well, right?
Yes. So I think there's like the physical power of the Wolverine, which there are sort of two areas that really come to mind for that. The first is they have these really powerful jaws, right? So they're scavengers primarily, and sometimes all they find is bones, but they can still crunch right through those bones and get to the marrow because their jaws are just so powerful. And then the other aspect of physical power, of course, is that they can just go and go and go and go across the landscape. They do not stop. They travel for hundreds and thousands of miles over the course of their lives, whether they're dispersing to a new area or they're patrolling their territory. They just have this capacity to not stop in a way that boggles my mind, even as a somewhat athletic individual. And then the other way that they're powerful is sort of like the presence that they project, which I think has to do, or that's the aspect of like being able to back a wolf or a bear off of a kill. And they are known to do that. Like they will just, if a pack of wolves kills something or a bear kills something and it goes away for a while to sleep off its meal and the Wolverine comes in and is scavenging, they have been known to just do that. Sometimes you'll see a smaller animal just act really kind of crazy, and the larger animal will be like, whoa, what's going on here? I better get out of here. Because this thing, even though it's small, is being really weird and nuts. And so Wolverines can do that. I think in situations where the bear or the wolf or the mountain lion is not having any of that and is like, I think this thing is just bluffing, if that happens and they get into it, a Wolverine might survive that encounter and might emerge as the victor, but we definitely have recorded cases of Wolverines being killed in those situations. So they do have this outsized berserker reputation, but I think it's important to remember that in the actual moment, it doesn't always end in the Wolverine's favor. And again, when we talk about them taking down those much larger ungulates that they're hunting, those are in situations where that ungulate is at some kind of disadvantage, usually because of snow conditions. And I don't, maybe it's a bit of like a content warning, the way Wolverines hunt is not pretty or merciful. It's pretty gruesome and agonizing for the prey animal. There is one video online that somebody took in Norway of a Wolverine attacking reindeer, if you want to see how that happens. But it's a lot of suffering for the reindeer, so it's pretty. I would watch that only under advisement if you really want to understand how a very small animal can take down a much larger animal. Not by any means to celebrate that happening, because it's
right.
It's a tough watch. Yeah,
I can imagine that. Yeah. I can just imagine what that one would entail.
Yeah. So yes, but they are adept at just living kind of above what you would expect for a 30 to 40 pound weasel, because you would not be expecting an animal that size to be able to pull off the kinds of things that it does.
Right, exactly. Well, like you said, I mean, it puts up that great front too, when it really wants something like that. Yeah, I've seen some of the documentaries on them, but
yeah,
they really do too. They look pretty ferocious when they're doing that.
Yeah, you've probably seen people do that too. I mean, if they're in some situation and they're just trying to bluff their way out of it, I think it's fun to reflect on the fact that Wolverines have this reputation as tricksters too, in a lot of sort of traditional worldviews. They're seen as these very powerful but very slippery sort of characters who can just trick their way out of anything, and that is reflected in their attitude, their ability to kind of, again, like, project this image of being much bigger than they are in multiple ways. And they also, I know that a lot of early trappers, if you read like European colonizer trapper accounts of Wolverines in North America, you know, they again, there's this idea that they're so ferocious and they're just going to tear your face off. But almost all of those encounters were with Wolverines who were in traps, and any animal that is in a trap is going to fight for its life. So, you know, again, they're not always that crazy and that ferocious. It has to do with the circumstances in which people are actually encountering them. I've had a in-person encounter with a Wolverine where the Wolverine did run towards us, which was a little disconcerting because you're like, what is this animal doing? But then it just circled around our camp for, 15 minutes or so watching us. So it was like, what are you doing here? Who are you? And then it went away. So, they can be ferocious, but they can also be very playful and very curious and very tricky. So yeah, all kinds of reputation involved with this animal.
Right. And you mentioned trappers, which I'm glad you actually mentioned, because I was going to ask you about their fur. Trappers like them because their fur is resistant to like snow and frost and stuff like that. So it makes it nice for some certain garments and stuff like that.
Yeah, Wolverines have I think their fur is thermoneutral, which means that it just is capable of insulating down to minus 40 degrees, and that's the same in Fahrenheit and Celsius. That's the point at which those two systems cross. So minus 40 degrees, they are thermoneutral, and that fur will also shed frost. So the frost just doesn't stick to it, which means that in a lot of cultures that trap in the north, they've been really historically valued as parka trim, hood trim for a parka, so that you can be in the cold and breathing out, and the fur around the face won't actually end up acquiring frost. Wolverines are not really, they're not abundant enough to be valuable in the way something like sable would have been in Eurasia for a long time, but they are considered, because they're so tricky. If you're a trapper, like being able to trap a Wolverine is really considered sort of like the holy grail of being a trapper. It's like a mark that you are truly a master trapper, because they're so good at stealing bait and getting away, and not actually getting trapped. And they also had this reputation back in the day for like running people's trap lines that had other things caught in them and just stealing all of the other animals that had been caught. So a lot of trappers who were trying to make a living and make money off of trapping kind of hated Wolverines because they did this, but they also had a lot of respect for them because they were so smart and so clever and so capable of outwitting the trappers.
Right. Yep. I know. I've heard about that too, and I watched the show Mountain Men, and and they do trapping and stuff, of course, on the show. So it's not too often, I don't think, that I've heard them come across like a Wolverine. But if I remember right, I think they had one in one of the episodes or something that did something like that. So yeah.
Interesting. I've not heard of that show. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's been on for quite some time. It's just about all these different guys or their families that live off the grid up in the different parts of the mountains, like Alaska and Montana, and some of them trap, and they do all sorts of different stuff, live off the land base, and everything, and they what they trap, they use, and they literally use everything of the animals that they take, like the Indians and stuff would have. But so yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've been watching it for a long time, and they've followed the lives of all sorts of different mountain men.
Very cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Those, as with my Mongolian associates, those are the folks who really know a lot about wildlife. So yeah, I should definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's on the History Channel.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit ago about how the Wolverine has these different little nicknames, and one that I thought was kind of funny but interesting was skunk bear. Why did they get the nickname skunk bear?
Yeah, so they do look a lot like little bears. I mean, they have a much longer tail than a bear, but they are basically sort of bear-shaped. They've got that general look, and they've got the little snout, and they've got the little ears, and then they have this big bushy tail. So that's very different from bears. But like bears and like humans, they walk with their feet flat on the ground. So, cats and dogs are up on their toes. They're digitigrade animals. That's the scientific term. And then bears and wolverines and humans walk plantigrade, which means that our heels are on the ground when we walk. And so overall, and wolverines also have 5 toes, like bears and like humans. On cats and dogs, that other toe has sort of migrated up the leg structure. So it doesn't, when you're looking at tracks, you only see 4 for like a cat or a dog. You see 4 toes, but with a wolverine you see 5. With a bear you see 5, and so there's sort of this sense of this animal could be a type of bear. But being part of the mustelid family, wolverines also are sort of stinky. They have a musk that they can spray on things, and so that's why they're called skunk bears. So they're sort of these stinkier bears. I will say that I personally find Wolverine scent to be not offensive. It's sort of like a strong goat cheese in my experience, rather than that just eye-wateringly repulsive skunk smell. So, it might be a little bit of overkill to actually call them skunk bears. I might just say they're scented bears, but that was, that makes them sound like they're perfume ad or something. I don't know. Scented might be a little bit too delicate of a word. I don't know. Aromatic, something like that. But that's why they're called skunk bears. That's why they have that nickname. They also sometimes are called devil bears, and that again goes to that sort of universal perception that they're a little bit tricky. Another nickname is nasty cat, and that one I don't run into quite as much, but I have come across it. In Mongolian, they're called Nhoizeh, which literally translates to the dog that stashes its meat. So when they do go into kills that belong to wolves or bears, they're known to sort of dismantle the carcass and drag those pieces off and stash them in different places to kind of make sure that the animal that actually killed the meat doesn't find it again. And so, these nicknames are actually pretty interesting because they do sometimes tell you something about the ecology or behavior of the animal.
Right. Yeah, I thought some of them were pretty interesting, but skunk bear really kind of stands out. You kind of remember that one.
Yeah, and I think it's great too because it does remind you, if you see something that looks like a small bear and your first instinct is bear, you can remember, wait a minute, what's a skunk bear? That's a wolverine, so it could actually be a wolverine. And then you check the tail and you see, is the tail bushy or is it short? And if it's a short tail, then it's probably a bear, and if it's a bushy tail, then hey, that might be a wolverine.
Right. Could really tell them apart if you can see the tail.
Mm-hmm. Well, and wolverines also have a kind of a stripe along their side, a paler stripe. I didn't really describe what they look like, but they have dark, they're dark brown, and then they have a paler stripe along their sides. And again, in Mongolian, sometimes they call them hengrikse, which literally means the hengrik. That word references a drum. It's like this animal that has a drum on its back because of that round, paler band. Okay. And then they have a little pale mask over their eyes, and they have white markings on their chest. And those white markings on their chest are distinctive in the same way that a tiger's stripes are distinctive. So if you can get a photo of a wolverine and you can see its chest patch, you can identify it to an individual animal if it shows up on your camera again. So yeah, that's what you're looking for if you actually see this sort of bear-shaped, bushy-tailed animal. It's dark brown, it's got a side stripe, and it's got some white markings on its chest and a little mask.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought, a lot of the pictures I've seen that stripe on the side, so.
Yeah. Yeah, there is variability. Sometimes that stripe doesn't show up. Sometimes you have a really dark animal. You can't really see it that well. And it varies from season to season, too. So, like, the pelt can change depending on what season they're in. But, yeah.
So another thing I thought was kind of interesting, and this is fun, because I'm actually from Michigan originally. I live in Arizona now, but I'm from Michigan. And that was the fact that, of course, as most people know, Michigan's known as the Wolverine state. Have, the Wolverine as the mascot for the college team and all that stuff. But there aren't really any Wolverines in Michigan that we know of. I think I read that they had saw one in, 30 years or something like that. Or I don't know. It was a very long period of time, though, but it was only one.
Yeah. So this is one of the biggest questions, and I just want to be sensitive to your feelings as a person from Michigan. I don't want to insult anybody who really identifies with the Wolverine and comes from Michigan, but Michigan has probably not had a resident population of Wolverines for the entirety of European presence in North America, and so we think that maybe it got that name because that was where the trading posts were located. At a certain point, the westernmost trading posts for the United States or for the Americas were located in Michigan, and those trading posts were funneling hides from further west. And so that was the place where European traders probably first encountered Wolverine pelts in North America, even though those pelts were coming from further west.
Right.
Now, and the reason Michigan doesn't have a Wolverine population is because it doesn't have those factors that I mentioned before.
Right.
It's too warm in the summer, and there isn't late spring snowpack. However, not that much further to the north in Canada, there are Wolverine populations. And one of the things we see in a fully robust Wolverine population, you do start to have spillover of juvenile animals into areas that are not really good habitat. So, those animals can live in that poor quality habitat and survive there, but it's what we would say is a sink ecologically, right? There's core habitat that's really good, and then along the fringes of that good habitat, you see animals showing up, but they probably couldn't survive there over the long term as a population because the conditions are less than ideal. And I think that before European colonization, it's also possible that you did have dispersers coming down from that better habitat to the north and being in Michigan once in a while, not as a long-term population, but just young animals dispersing. And this is something I should have mentioned before, but one of the things that makes this sort of lower 48 Wolverine population interesting is the fact that actually almost all, if not every single Wolverine in the lower 48 was killed by the early 20th century. And some of that was trapping, but most of it was because of wolf poisoning campaigns in the western United States. And Wolverines have such a good nose for carrion, right? That's how they survive. They sniff out these dead animals on the landscape, and when wolf hunters and kind of the wolf eradication program was operating, they would put out carcasses that were laced with poison in order to kill wolves. And Wolverines, which are a low-density animal in the first place, would find these carcasses, get into them, and die. And it didn't take that much to just wipe them off the landscape altogether because they were so low-density in the first place. So when I say what we see in fully connected, robust Wolverine populations is this spillover into non-habitat, we haven't had that in the lower 48 for a very long time because Wolverines were basically not here for the first half of the 20th century, and they've started to recolonize from Canada in the past 60 years or so, 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I was going to say if we did see, a spillover, it may be the UP in Michigan, not so much I wouldn't think like the lower peninsula part, but more of the UP, they might have a little bit. I mean, even with that, not like what you're talking about for them to completely populate, but but I wouldn't see them making their way any lower than the UP for Michigan, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, and I think it would be tricky now because, there are Wolverine populations in Ontario and parts of Quebec, but then there's a band of pretty urbanized parts of Canada that they would have to get through to get to the UP. But yes, if there were Wolverines showing up again, and Wolverines actually do disperse through suburban and urban areas, and if they can avoid the hazards, they'll make it through. So yeah, there could be one that might show up in the UP. Now, one animal that was sighted was a female, and it's really unclear where she came from. There was some genetic work done, and it showed that she grouped with these Ontario Wolverines, so she might have done exactly that. She might have come down from Ontario and into Michigan, and there was a school teacher there who for many years had a camera trap set up, and he would bait it with chicken, I think, mostly. Yeah. And she would come in and he would document all of these photographs of her. Not only, the thing that was super interesting, I mean, she was just totally chill, and she hung around, and it was great. She was also hanging out with a lot of raccoons, which I found very interesting. Like, they would all show up to this camera trap, and she would just be on there with these raccoons. But then she died, I think, in 2010 of congestive heart failure, and that is the last known Wolverine in Michigan.
Yeah, I read that little story about that one there. I thought that was pretty interesting. But, I mean, yeah, way back when, when everything was different and, Ice Age stuff, and maybe we had some around in that area. But I was going to say...
Oh, for sure.
I had never heard of Michigan anybody really seeing any Wolverines in Michigan, so when I had read that, I thought that was kind of interesting, because I was always wondered why we were called Wolverine State, because it was like...
Yeah.
Well,
as far as we can surmise, it has to do with the fact that that's where Europeans were first encountering these pelts from Wolverines. And and during the Pleistocene, Wolverines were as far south as I think at least the Carolinas, because of course there were continental ice sheets that were covering, pretty far to the south, and so the cold habitat pushed way further south. So there are fossil Wolverines that have been found in what we now consider the American South, but those are gone before Europeans got here. Yeah.
So since we've been kind of talking about, the climate and stuff like that, and of course Ice Age and all that, let's talk a little bit about how the warming climates that are being experienced in areas where the Wolverines live, how are they impacting them?
Yeah, we don't see direct impacts right now, but we can predict with a fair amount of confidence that because Wolverines are so closely tied to these cold climates, they are really going to face a lot of challenges. I have a hard time talking about it just because it makes me so sad to think about all of the species that are likely going to be lost to climate change, and I also don't want to really bum out your listeners or you, but I think it's highly likely that we will lose Wolverines out of a lot of their current habitat simply because ecologically they require such huge spaces, and they depend on cold conditions, not just for denning, which is the thing that has come up the most in discussions about how they might be affected. They're going to lose that snowpack that they need to successfully den, and that's definitely true. But they're dependent on cold climates in multiple ways, and we've talked about how cold climate provides refrigeration for Wolverine food, which allows them to have a reliable food source through many months when it's cold. The other way that snowpack specifically provides an advantage to Wolverines is the fact that it excludes other predators while snow is on the ground. So they don't have competition from wolves or bears or mountain lions because those animals are so much less efficient at traveling through that deep snowpack. So as long as the snow is on the ground and it's relatively deep, they have a bit of an advantage because that snow kind of serves as a wall or a moat against intrusion by these other animals that can be competition and that can kill Wolverines. So there are so many factors that tie Wolverines to this cold niche, and if it gets warmer, that is going to hit them hard in all of those ways. And I don't know what their prospects will be, but and again, I don't want to be like a doomsayer, but I just want to acknowledge that it will be a cost of climate change if we don't somehow find the will to take action on this really complicated problem that affects not just Wolverines but all of us. So yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely. It's not the first time we've kind of talked about changing climate here on the podcast, and I know a lot of people doubt that that's really happening. You know, you have your naysayers, but I mean, if you just sit back and you pay attention around you, I mean, especially I mean, older people may get it a little bit more than maybe the younger people sometimes, because like I can sit back and I can look back at when I was, a kid, what the climate was like back when I was a kid as compared to now. And I can see that there's been a change. Now, I'm not saying it's one thing or another that's caused it. It's a multitude of different things that have come together to cause it. But we do need to figure out a way to fix it and stop doing what we're doing and, try to turn some things around to make things better. But, it'll be interesting to see, because I know there is a lot. There's quite a few animals that would be looking at being lost if things keep going. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so many. And I like you, I'm old enough that I have a memory of when climate was different or when the weather was different. Definitely the trends, especially in the summers, it's just so much hotter. It's like onerous. Yeah. But the thing, I really wish it weren't such a political question, because to me, it's such a huge, it's overwhelming and like anxiety inducing, but it's also this huge opportunity, right? To there's so many things about the way things are structured that are actually detrimental to humans as well, and it's a real opportunity to make things better, to create bikeable towns, and fossil fuel burning coal plants going away would help improve asthma rates in kids. And so it feels like it should be a win-win situation where we could just make all of these great improvements for people as well as for wildlife. And I hope that people will apply their imaginations and get excited about that aspect of it, rather than arguing about whether it's happening or not. So that's my pitch.
Yeah.
Let's use our imaginations and make a better world all around.
And like I said, you don't need to really, if you just literally sit back and just look around you and think about the way that things used to be, and now I think it feels like to me I'm seeing more hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff like that, and stronger, more powerful ones.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that definitely, anecdotally, it seems that way to me, and also the data bear that out, that those hurricanes are much stronger, and the hurricane season is longer, and fire season. Yeah. I mean, that's something that we deal with here in the Rockies. Even when I moved to Bozeman, it used to start in, August, and now it starts in June. So, you can see it.
Oh, I know. I live in Arizona.
Yes.
Yeah. We have
a fire-prone place.
Oh yeah, big time. We have them all the time. Whether it's lightning strikes or, believe it or not, immigrants coming across the border and through the mountains to get through. Light campfires and then just walk away and leave them.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It happens out here. I only live maybe an hour away from the border of Mexico, so. And it's a thing. I mean, we have a mountain range that is between here where I live and on the other side of that range is Mexico. So, yeah, so it's kind of like, people that don't live here don't understand what, I'm not going to get into all of it, but they don't understand what actually is kind of happening here on the border. You have to live here to really get the gist of it and see what's going on. But yeah, a lot of our fires are human started. I mean, whether it's illegal immigrants crossing through, or campers out just being irresponsible, or a lot of lightning strikes, especially because of the mountains. So we get a lot of lightning strikes. But anyway, yeah, wildfire season it's been crazy, and it has been getting worse, and we've been seeing more fires. But anyway, I don't want to go off on this whole climate change tangent and everything, but yeah, you just got to sit back and look. You don't need to be political, like you said. You don't need to argue about it. Just really open your eyes and sit back and just observe and see what's going on and make your own judgment. I mean, that's all you got to do. But
Yeah, and I think you emphasize again that, like with wildfires, that again is something that has a real impact on people, not just on the animals. So again, just please take care for your own communities and the people in them when you're thinking about those questions of climate change. So yes,
Yep.
It's not such a tangent because it is completely connected to Wolverines, but it also ties humans to Wolverines in this way that I find very interesting.
Yep.
So,
and it ties us to many. And I hear that polar bears are another big one that is losing their habitat because the climate where they live has been changing and it's been shrinking, whether people believe it or not. I mean, it's a proven scientific fact on that. So
yeah, and that's so sad to see those photos of those polar bears who basically have lost their homes, and what are they going to do?
Yeah. So
and pikas, I don't know if you've ever looked at pikas, but pikas are another they're so cute, and like they're another climate sensitive species that's going to lose a lot of habitat.
Oh wow!
So yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, let's go back and we're coming towards the end of the podcast here, but I just had a couple more questions for you real quick. Wolverines are probably one of the least understood animals out there. Why do you think that they're so, misunderstood? What is it about them? Is it, just because we don't see them a lot, because they're so solitary, or kind of...
I think... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, kind of live in the elevations they, live at, there's not a lot of people, per se, that would see them.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, at least in this country where, kind of the discipline of wildlife science is something that came up only in the last century, and there was that absence of wolverines from the landscape for much of the time when wildlife biology was really developing as a field. They didn't get any attention because they just weren't in this country, right? So bears and wolves were these sort of big visible animals that everybody remembered really well, and that had these sort of symbolic aspects that people were really invested in. Wolverines, it's the sort of 30-pound weasel that nobody ever sees, and it, as you pointed out, human habitat and wolverine habitat don't really overlap that much in terms of where humans are actually making a living versus where wolverines are making a living. And so, they're just sparse on the landscape. They don't overlap with humans. They're not often seen, and they were literally not here. So you see the first collar study of wolverines, I think, in this country was done in the 1980s, which is relatively recently. And then there was nothing until the beginning of the 21st century. And so they're just really data deficient is how we talk about it in the research community. We still are barely finding out the basics about how this animal operates and what it needs to survive and how we can best live with it.
Right. I'm sure it's the same with quite a few different species that are more solitary and harder to research and see and be able to study. But these guys, they really do seem to, it seems to be very rare, unless like yourself, where you're really kind of diligent and you're right out there and you're really waiting and you can kind of figure out, I guess that would be a good, now that I'm thinking about it, a good question. So, in their territory, do they have a specific route that they might follow to patrol their territory, or do they just kind of zigzag across it? Is it just random how they go around it? Because, some animals have a specific way they travel around their territory, things like that.
Well, wolverines can go anywhere, so they will go anywhere. But what we see when we look at the collar data from collar studies, they do go all over the place. The places they return to are places where they are accustomed to finding food. So if they've stashed a carcass someplace, if they've found a carcass in an avalanche, that'll mark one of the definite points on their trajectory. So they're traveling through their territories and they're finding food. And they're scent marking, and they'll push the boundaries of their territory out as far as they can until they run into another wolverine scent marking. And then they don't cross that line, or they only cross it if there's a big, very stinky piece of food right on the other side of it. We see consistently in the collar data that the edges of their territory, they run up against each other and they will not cross that line. So they're traveling, they're looking for food, they're defending or they're patrolling the outer edge of their own territory up to the point where it runs into another Wolverine's territory.
Yeah, because I mean, I just thought of that, if they did that, because it is like I said, some animals do follow a certain, path that they go around all the time, and they hit certain spots at certain times and stuff like that, so.
What we see is when we have research traps out, which is, of course, that's where you're going to be putting some kind of meat to lure them in to the research trap. They will come back to that trap again and again and again. Even when it's not operating, they'll return to that spot and they'll check it out and they'll be like, hey, has anybody put my chunk of elk in this wooden box lately? Guess not. Okay, continuing on my way. But they will come back to it. And we don't run those traps in the summer, or when the bears are awake. Basically, that's when the traps get shut down. But the Wolverines will still come back and check it out even when the bears are awake. So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So the last question I had for you, because I found it, I looked it up and found it was interesting. Are Wolverines on the endangered species list?
Yeah, they just received listing as threatened last year, and that was after a saga of almost 20 years of petitioning for listing. So in the U.S., if you think of a species should be on the endangered species list, you can create a petition to list the species. And that had been done for Wolverines multiple times, and it came back for years. Every decision came back, this animal is data deficient. We simply do not know enough about this animal to say whether or not it's endangered. And then the science started coming in showing climate change was actually a big threat for Wolverines, and there was, again, unfortunately, we can't get away from it. There was a lot of political resistance to that finding, and so it took some time to get to a decision that was actually based on the science, and that finally happened last year. So they are listed as threatened. Colorado is considering a reintroduction. The threatened status makes that a little more. I add some dimensions to that reintroduction process in Colorado, and there are other initiatives to better understand the species now that they do have some funding through the Endangered Species Act. So,
good.
Yes.
Good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Rebecca, we're pretty much at the end of the podcast. I am so glad that you were able to join me tonight and give us all this really cool information about Wolverines, because I learned quite a bit tonight, so I'm pretty sure that my listeners or my people out there that will download this later and listen are going to find it pretty interesting too, because learned a lot of stuff I didn't know about them.
Well, I just so appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate your care for wildlife and the interest that you and your listeners take in not just Wolverines, but in all of these animals that we share our planet with.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, from the bugs right on up to the bigger animals and stuff. In fact, in a few months I'm going to have a gentleman on to talk about ants. I have found out more interesting stuff about ants than I ever knew.
That is so cool.
It is. I just some of these things that he does YouTube videos, and I was watching his YouTube videos, and I'm just like, really? The ants do this? Wow, are you kidding me? So yeah, it's pretty cool to find out some of these things about ants. I was just like, well, I never really thought about that. We have medic ants. We have ants that make their own little armor. It was just amazing.
That is so cool, and I will tell you, of course, renowned ant scientist E.O. Wilson wrote an essay about his two favorite animals, and one of them, of course, was a species of ant, but the other one was the Wolverine. So I have a total fascination with ants because E.O. Wilson, who is so fascinated by ants, also was fascinated by the animal that I'm fascinated by. So there's an ant-Wolverine connection for you, too.
Oh, cool. That's pretty awesome. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and announce my next couple podcasts that are going to be coming up, and you're welcome to stick around and listen to those, or you can jump off, whichever you prefer. It's your choice.
Okay, I might actually wrap up. I have two cats here who need to be fed, and they are making that known. So thank you again so much for the opportunity, and just wish you and your listeners all the best for the holiday season.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and the same to you and your family, and then I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you so much.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, have a good one. Bye. All right, everybody, so Rebecca just jumped off. So I am actually, as you guys know, it's going to be Christmas here next week, and we've got New Year's. So I am not going to be doing a podcast on the 2nd, which would have actually been the next one. I'm going to be off through that week because of the holidays that we're going to be celebrating. So I hope you all have a happy holidays or a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, whatever you may say. And I hope you all enjoy and spend lots of time with your friends and families and have some really good dinners and celebrations. And but not too much, and don't be driving if you've been drinking. That's a no-no. So anyway, the next podcast is actually going to be on January 9th. And that's what I am going to have James Lamont back on with me to talk about the K9 PTSD Center. He's done some expansion and updates to the PTSD Center, and some of the things he's done is really cool. So I'm going to have him coming back on to talk with me about what he's done there at the K9 PTSD Center. So I think that's going to be a great one. And then on January 23rd, I am going to have Michael French and Lisa Arnold on. They're the founders of Enhanced Vet Science, and they make like treat supplements and stuff like that for our pets, and they're going to come on and talk about, they're doing this new like marketing kind of thing, and it's pretty cool. I got a free sample so I could check it out, of course, before the podcast. You can give them a picture of your pet and they put it on the bag. So I thought that was pretty cool. So they're going to be on to talk about their new marketing with the picture of your pet on the bag and their different products and what they do and how they got started. So I think that'll be a really good podcast too, and get lots of information out there about Enhanced Vet Sciences. So again, don't forget I'll be off for the couple weeks during the holidays. I won't be back on until January 9th, and that's when I'll have James Lamont with the K9 PTSD Center. And then on the 23rd, I will have Michael French and Lisa Arnold, and we'll be talking from Enhanced Vet Sciences, and we'll be talking more about those. So I hope you all, again, have a very happy holiday season. I hope you enjoy. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and stay safe out there. And hopefully you'll be back in a few weeks to hear the next podcast. All right, good night now.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. And now I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun, Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino-style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free, and each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
As humans, we're naturally driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. When I was looking to hire someone, it was so slow and overwhelming. I wish I had used Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.